Welcome everyone to the Brass Spring 2023 Online Symposium. I'm Angel Truesdale, the Chair of the Business Reference and Academic Libraries Committee for Brass and the Chair of the Symposia Subcommittee. Thank you to our subcommittee, Christy Cunningham, Brian Garrison, and Christine Pollock. All sessions will be recorded and sent out to those who have registered. Please mute your audio and video as we get started. Thank you for spending time with Brass today and our presenters. Now, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Brian, to get us started.
Hi, everyone. This is Brian Garrison at the University of North Dakota. I'd like everyone to welcome Catherine Howell with her presentation, Outreach Strategies for New Business Librarians. Take it away, Catherine. So I'm Brian Garrison at the University of North Dakota once again, and I'd like to have everybody welcome Catherine Howell with her presentation, Outreach Strategies for New Business Librarians.
Thank you all. And then I don't know if I have screen sharing permission.
You should.
When I click share, it says host disabled it.
Okay, try now. Sorry about that.
No problem. All right, can everyone see my slides? Yes. Excellent, thank you, I appreciate that. So I will go ahead and get started. So I'm going to be talking to you all today about outreach strategies, particularly for new business librarians. At any point, please feel free to ask questions in the chat or to unmute yourself because I want this to be a fairly interactive presentation. We're gonna have a few I'll have a few questions for you all to answer as polls, and then we'll have a discussion at the end, but please feel free to ask any questions in the chat as they come up. So to get started, I just want to kind of guide you through what we'll be talking about today. First, I'll give you a quick introduction about myself and kind of why I'm talking about this. I have a few quick poll questions for you to learn more about who I'm talking to. I'm going to address some challenges that I went through as a new business librarian performing outreach. And then kind of the most of what I'll be talking about is successful strategies for outreach, as well as some lessons I learned from what didn't go so well. And then at the end of this presentation, we'll have some time for discussion with everyone to kind of talk about what they've learned as well. So to get started, prior to becoming a librarian, I actually worked in investment banking, and that's kind of why business librarianship was kind of a clear path for me, and it's something I enjoyed doing. I graduated with my Master of Library and Information Science in May 2021, which was a fun time to graduate. And I'm currently in my second year at Western Kentucky University as the online learning librarian and a liaison to the College of Business. So our College of Business here is about 6 different departments, as well as a few graduate programs. So my job is kind of dual fold, so I kind of have a dual focus there. So just so that I can know a little bit more about you, I have a few ways to interact. If you all have a phone out, if you could just scan the QR code or go to slido.com and type in that code. I just wanted to know, first of all, to what degree does you all's position involve liaison work? Okay, interesting that it's almost half and half there. So that makes sense. And I'm one of the ones that would fall kind of in the part of my job category as well. But it does sound like the vast majority of you all do perform some liaison work. So that's helpful to know. So we'll move on to the next question I have, which is, how long have you worked as a librarian? So I'm kind of coming at this from somebody who is fairly new to the profession in general. So I just wanted to know if you all are new or if some of you have more experience. And it looks like we've got a good range. It seems like a lot of you are kind of newer, but we have some seasoned professionals as well. So I'll be counting on some of you to provide some discussion later on about what you've tried that works well. So thank you. And then my last question, no need to spend a lot of time on it, but if you can just enter a quick text response. I was wondering, what are your biggest challenges as a liaison? Yeah, these are great responses. I think these are going to be some of my similar ones too, especially getting responses and buy-in, and getting in the door. So that's very helpful. And I think as business librarians, sometimes we kind of have to fight a little extra hard to get in front of students and kind of get faculty to respond to us. So my presentation today will hopefully address some of you all's challenges, and I'm going to talk next about some of mine as well. So thank you for your responses. So I had some difficulties getting started as a liaison to the College of Business. So I'm just going to provide some background about that. So when I started my position, I was new to both librarianship and the university. So I had worked during my time in graduate school as a graduate assistant, but not as a liaison. So that performing that work was kind of new to me. And I think it might be similar for you all, that you didn't necessarily get training in your graduate program to do kind of almost like a sales role of being a liaison. So that was new to me, as well as being new to WKU as a whole. So I had to kind of create connections from scratch and really learn the best ways of doing that. Secondly, kind of one of the questions I asked before of you all, liaison work is only half of my position's responsibilities. So it's been time constraints is definitely a challenge of mine, where I can't dedicate all my time to liaison work, but it is a very significant part of how I'm evaluated in my job. Thirdly, I was assigned to the College of Business, and it was very underserved. So there was somebody who retired, who had been serving the business college for quite a long time. But once they retired, it kind of switched around to a few different librarians. And at the time that I inherited it, based on our stats, there were really about 3 instruction sessions for the entire year, the year before I got to the job. And even before COVID, those numbers were very low. So I kind of was starting from scratch and didn't have any relationships to start off with, or a lot of kind of trust in the library. And then lastly, something you all mentioned in your responses is that there was a low response to outreach, and I really had to do some trial and error to figure out what might get better responses and get more feedback from the faculty I was working with. So that being said, I'm going to talk about some successful strategies. So the things that worked well for me. First off, and I imagine many of you already do this, but something that worked really well for me on the back end is tracking all of my interactions. And I highly recommend doing this just because it makes my life a lot easier. And what I do is every semester, I kind of started this my first semester, and then I copy over into a new tab that information and update it for the new semester. But some of the things that I track are obviously name, department, title, and then for that semester, whether or not they're new, because my approach to reaching out will be different if they're new faculty, whether I've taught for them before, because also that will affect kind of the way I do outreach, as well as kind of performing some research to see if there are any relevant courses or ideas I have to interact with them, whether that's a session or a tutorial I could make for them. And somebody in the chat just asked how many faculty are in my liaison area. That's a great question. I have about 75 faculty members right now. So that's kind of how many I'm working with. So I have all of those kind of as a row in my spreadsheet. And then I also track whether or not I have sent an email yet or not, to kind of track who I've interacted with so far, who I've reached out to so far, as well as I record whether or not they responded. So even if it's just a thank you for that information, I'll kind of count that just to see. I don't use software to get a hit rate or anything like that, or a click rate. I just use Outlook and email, but I will track to see if they responded to me. But particularly what I track is whether or not I'm scheduling instruction based on that, to see what's kind of happening there. And then I can look back at previous years to see what I've done. And this has been really helpful, especially in kind of collecting data, and not necessarily data to share anywhere, but data for myself, because I can kind of look at that response rate and see if it's growing, which it has grown slightly. I think I probably get max of a 30% response rate, but that's grown a lot since maybe about 10% in my first semester. So that's a really important area and a way to keep track of everything. So next is tailoring emails to recipients. So I kind of tried two different things. When I first started in this position, I kind of talked to other faculty members in my department about what they do. And kind of what people tended to do is to send a really long list of ways that the librarian can help the faculty member. So that's kind of what I did to start, but I really wasn't seeing a ton of response from that. And I had a feeling that those emails didn't seem quite as personal. So what I really learned is keeping things short. So some of the most responses I got were to emails that were really just like, hi, I'd love to meet with you to talk about ways that we can work together. Those were really, really effective. And also if I could perform syllabi research, I know some of you all talked about in the response to that question that you're not able to get those, which is definitely difficult. Luckily, at my institution, we kind of have a bank of those, or a place where most of them, not all of them, are deposited. So I can often check in and see whether or not their classes have a research assignment, whether or not I can buy their textbook and things like that. So kind of digging in there. And lastly, targeting new faculty. So kind of, I think that's a really key population. So I think it's a similar thing where you offer to help and introduce yourself, but I've created some really great partnerships with new faculty. And I can even offer to do things like, for one faculty member, they were new to teaching as well as new to the university. So I helped them develop some research assignments that I ended up teaching on. So that was a really effective partnership. And that kind of came out of me reaching out and asking to come to their office. And we were able to set up some meetings. Next, and I think this is especially important for those that are business faculty, is utilizing case studies. I really found a lot more responses to my emails when I was able to kind of tell a story about what I'd done in the past. And obviously I couldn't do that my first semester, but after I'd gotten some traction and taught a few things, I think that this really kind of shows people what librarians can do, because there's often a lot of confusion about what our role might be, especially if faculty haven't had a lot of connection with a librarian. And so kind of what I would recommend is kind of doing it in almost a formula. So including who you worked with, so mentioning their colleague by name, what you did for them, what exactly you taught, and then what the result of your teaching was. So on the screen, I kind of have I've copied something I've actually used before. So I said that many of your colleagues have found my class visits to be extremely helpful for your students. And then I talked about the name of the professor, the department they were in, and like what class it was. And I talked about what I taught for them. And then for this one, the result was that 12 groups of students reached out to schedule a time to meet with me. And then I was able to coach them on how to perform research, and that resulted in higher engagement and better performance on the project. So kind of having those three pieces, I think, was really strong. And those emails, a lot of people, it kind of opened them up to what I could teach about. And another thing kind of alongside case studies is sometimes when you're planning instruction, you might get, especially with one-shots, you might have a request for just, can you come in and introduce students to the library? And you're not really given any other details about what they'd like you to teach or what kind of the goals for that are. And so sometimes you can also show them instructional materials that you've developed for other classes, kind of the same thing as a case study, to say, you know, this is what I've taught in another class. These are kind of the topics I covered. Does something like that sound good to you? And that can really kind of, again, just show what we could do in their classroom.
Catherine, it looks like we have a question. What strategies did you use for syllabi research?
Oh, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that it's a bit tedious, but kind of doing it in chunks and using that spreadsheet and kind of just working through name by name. What I would do is look up that professor kind of in our syllabi bank, and then kind of just review each syllabus in detail. Some of them obviously have more information than others, but what I would really look for are any final projects or any use of the word research or anything like that. And also just overall what the class was about. I think a lot of business courses may not have a final research project, but involve the use of, for example, financial data or finding accounting standards or performing market research. And so seeing if there are any opportunities there, and then kind of being creative about ways to do that. So kind of just listing out, like, for example, for a marketing course, I could say, you know, I see that in this course, they're going to have to work as a group to target a target market and kind of create a product to sell to them. So I can say, I have a lot of experience teaching in that, and I can teach them about not only how to narrow down that target market, but what kinds of sources they could use for demographics and psychographics. So being as specific as possible with kind of what you would teach to them, I think is really helpful. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the information.
Yeah, thank you. And so another thing that I struggled with, especially getting started, was kind of finding ways to reach out that didn't feel tedious, or just like I was just saying, hello, it's me again, your librarian, but thinking about after that kind of initial outreach and possibly scheduling instruction, but then finding other ways to connect. And one way that I kind of thought of last semester was emailing about new ebooks I purchased. So a lot of you all may do collection development alongside of your liaison responsibility. And so I kind of just wanted to highlight the fact that that is part of my job. It's something we do and something that they can kind of suggest. Like I also asked them if they had any suggestions for our collection, but it's a great way to show off that this is something we're doing. And this is just an Outlook. It's essentially a table that has the borders hidden, and then it's the covers of the books that I purchased. And if you click on them, it takes you kind of into the ebook version. So it's just kind of another way to reach out. And I did actually receive some positive response on that. I had a few faculty members say like, you know, this is great, and even suggested some titles for me. So if you could do something like that, I think that would be a great idea. And some other options would be reaching out about workshops or events, whether that's workshops for students or faculty. For example, we have a lot of finals, like study hour options. And so we can reach out to professors and say, you know, pass this along to your students if you'd like. Other options are reaching out about new databases, whether those are trials or new things we've gotten. And we actually have an OER librarian now. So sometimes my OER librarian will kind of suggest some titles to me that may be relevant to business faculty. And so I'll let them know that that's an option if they wanted to pursue that, for example, for a textbook. So just thinking of things that they might be interested in, and not always expecting a response, but just showing that you're knowledgeable. And then I just saw a question in the chat. That's a good question. So they're asking about sending larger emails. I sent these individually, which can be a little tedious, but it's the same email for people. Like, I think one thing I learned is that anything where you're CCing a large group of people, you're less likely to have an interaction based on that. So what I did was I kind of went through and emailed people individually, but used kind of the exact same script every time. So I would, you know, say by name, you know, hey, but the email would be the same for each department. So I did this by department. So the example on the screen is for accounting. I also did one for marketing, one for economics, one for management. And so I sent a similar email, but I kind of tailored it and used the name of the person I was sending it to. And then I really don't tend to send a lot of group emails. I try to avoid that when possible. I know that is a little tedious. And I think for those of you that have, you know, more than 75 people, that's definitely maybe a better option, is to send group emails, but I really try to avoid that. And I send individual emails when I can. And somebody else suggested mail merge, which I do think is a great idea. I don't use that, but I think I've heard that that's a great option. And so another thing that I've found to be effective, I think that we as librarians have some knowledge that can really contribute to faculty professional development. And I think that that can be another way to really connect with your liaison areas, is just kind of providing that additional service. I think so much of our outreach is instruction based and trying to get into classes, but I think it's also important to kind of showcase that we can help them with their individual research and helping them get tenure as well. And so, for example, I've offered workshops for faculty before. The one that I've offered the same one twice, has been about communicating scholarly identity, which is in the realm of scholarly communication. And it's basically talking about the different types of bibliometrics that are available, where to find them in our databases, and then how to use those to kind of communicate an identity. So whether that's on academic social media or a Google Scholar profile or a personal website, kind of using that to communicate what you're researching and why it's important. And that's really important for tenure track or pre-tenure faculty. So I had about 25 faculty members across campus attend. And I specifically, kind of like I said, reaching out throughout the semester, I reached out to a few faculty members, especially the ones that I had like a good rapport with and was like, here's something we're offering. I'd love to see you there. And then other ideas would be, I haven't done these, but something to think about would be creating research assignments. I think can be another really great realm for a librarian to teach about. I think often faculty don't quite have the same knowledge of information literacy as we do. So providing a workshop, for example, on how to develop a really strong research assignment could be another opportunity. And a giant topic kind of in higher education right now is AI and ChatGPT. And I know a lot of librarians have been doing some thinking about that. So getting creative about ways to help faculty that aren't just teaching in their class, but also helping with their own development and research is important. And I did mine through collaboration with our Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning on campus. And they are a group that does a lot of faculty development things. And so they helped me advertise it. And I think that was why I had so many attendees, was because they were doing a lot of that advertisement broadly for faculty. And this is kind of an obvious one, but especially if you're new to your position and new to campus, I think getting involved however you can and just being a presence, so attending events hosted by the departments that you liaise with can be really important. I often attend student kind of research days or competitions, and that can be good for both students and faculty to just be seen. Sometimes I'll introduce myself and make connections there, but then it just keeps me aware of what's happening and what kind of things are going on. Obviously, through our service, we can make connections with our faculty that way. I've made stronger connections with my business faculty by joining university or faculty senate and also other committees around campus. And then I kind of talked about working with my campus's CITL, or the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. So if you can become involved with an office like that, they often do kind of professional learning communities and kind of informal groups to get together. For example, I joined a book club for female faculty members, and I was able to make connections that way and meet a lot of people in business and outside of business. And then lastly, this is kind of the one I'll talk about with students, because most of what I do with being the business liaison is kind of connecting with students in the classroom. But I also think it's important to have co-curricular engagement or kind of some presence outside of that classroom, because obviously you can't be invited to every class. And something that I've had success with, which I know many people have kind of tried in the past, is engaging with students in the building they attend classes in. So on my campus, all of the business classes are in the same building. And so I've talked to different people who are in charge of the space to be able to kind of set up a table and give out food or swag, which is very key to have people come by, but giving out stickers or other things that we have and maybe a snack. And then it's really just a way to establish your presence and advertise library services. I did not use it necessarily I know some people have used it where they go to a room, like in a space where students are often working, to try to answer reference questions, but that wasn't really how I used it. I more used it just to make myself known and to kind of have some interactions with students. And it did result in many positive interactions where students stopped by and I talked to them about how they use the library and kind of some of the services we had to offer. So I had a few students that didn't know that we had research consultations they could book. And I think I had a few that actually resulted because of that. So it's kind of hard to assess how much kind of reference transactions or how much interaction that caused later down the road. But I think it was a good idea and relatively easy to do. So I think it's very important not only to learn from what I did do well or what I thought went well, but also from what did not go so well for me. So a few things that I did not have success with. The first was, I kind of talked about this earlier, was sending too much information. I think so often we can be kind of eager to say, here's all these different realms I can help you with, but to kind of break up communication. So instead of emailing with a long list of ways to help, it's maybe breaking that up over the semester. So maybe starting with kind of scheduling instruction and tailoring your email to be, here's how I can teach in your classes. And then maybe that means later on in the semester, then you'll reach out about the fact that you do collection development, or then you'll provide that faculty workshop or student workshop. So kind of thinking about different ways to communicate that and not just doing it all in one email, because I think for faculty, it was very overwhelming to see a large block of text. And even though I did send it out, by name to them, it might have felt kind of impersonal and like I was sending a giant chain email. So one thing I would recommend is simplifying your communication if you can, or at least that's what worked well for me. The second thing that I was not able to have any success with, and I'd be interested to hear if you all have had success with this, but I really was not able to meet or visit any department meetings. So I asked a lot of different department heads of all the departments I covered, but that was not something that nobody ever really took me up on. So I kind of had to abandon that, and I still sometimes will ask, but I don't really think that that's going to be an effective route for me, at least on this campus. They seem to be less interested in that and would prefer me to just reach out via email to the faculty members. And then on a student standpoint, one thing I tried that some of my colleagues had done were creating flyers. And I think that I think I designed a solid flyer, and I think one problem that I did not realize is that the time it takes to print out those flyers and then post them everywhere, bulletin boards turn around so quickly on college campuses. And so I think I felt like, it took a lot of effort to kind of put those around, and then a week later, they'd all be kind of taken down and the board would be reset. So it kind of didn't seem like it was as effective as some other efforts. I did have one student, though, I'm proud to say, that came in, and I asked him how he knew to meet with me, and because he hadn't had a class with me, and he was like, "Oh, I saw your flyer." So I got one student from it, but I think that my time probably could have been spent better elsewhere. I think, for example, sitting in the space is better than kind of posting flyers around if possible. And I'm just going to check the chat really quick to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, yeah, so some people are talking about their ability to, whether or not they're able to go to department meetings or not. So it seems like maybe some people have had success and some have not. So that being said, I want to move into kind of the discussion portion for the last 15 minutes of this session. I really want to know from you all what's worked or not worked for you. And I'd be happy for you to either unmute or use the chat. You can also use this time to ask me questions if you have any, but I think we can kind of all learn from each other. So feel free to discuss with us.
Catherine, I have a question.
Sure.
One thing that it was really one of your first points, but creating case studies to, I guess, speak to faculty in sort of their language. I know that I think one of the presentations maybe not too long ago was talking about, information is value as one of the bullet points that at least students respond to. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe how you've used your knowledge of business as sort of a conduit to speak in the language of faculty.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I've actually had situations where when faculty found out about my background and the fact that I worked in business before, I kind of felt like there was almost a switch where they kind of took me more seriously. So I think for those of you that do kind of have that professional knowledge, I think using that can be very helpful. One professor that I met with who wanted me to teach her students, she was doing a senior level small business like entrepreneurship course where they had to do a really involved final project where they worked with local businesses. And one thing that I kind of talked about in that class that she really wanted me to talk about was how I did business research when I was in the profession and kind of why it's important and the ways to use it. So I think that's kind of one way to bring that in, is to kind of, if you do have that personal experience, to share it. But also, I think many of us have gained that experience, from teaching. So I think that's kind of where case studies come in to say, I know about these things and I have done these things, can be really key. Does that answer your question, Brian?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, and somebody else also in the chat noticed that credentials can be important, and it's unfortunate, but I think that as business librarians, that's probably something we've seen a lot, that sometimes compared to some of our other liaisons, we might have to kind of fight a little harder. And when there are credentials, I think that can be really helpful. Oh, and then somebody else talked about something where they kind of were in person at the business school to reach students for research help. And so I think that's a cool thing that you tried. Yeah, it's definitely, like I said, I didn't have any success with actually answering any questions when I was in there. So I kind of treated it more as like here's me at a table saying hi. But I think it's interesting to also try. I think it's a good thing to try to see if there is kind of that need in the Student Success Center. And Julianne just asked a question about reaching instructors when there are so many adjuncts and classes keep changing. I think that's where unfortunately, the answer is just dedicating time to really doing that at the beginning of every semester. I think one thing that's important is, if possible, some of us don't work all summer long, but for me, if I can, I try to email faculty kind of when syllabi are being planned and kind of start that research even a little further out then. And so I think it's unfortunately just taking that time to make sure, if you have a spreadsheet, making sure it's up to date, checking to see kind of the list of faculty, including adjuncts. So that's kind of looking at the course schedule to see who's teaching, what are they teaching. And I think there's no kind of cheat code, but really, I think if you take that time to do that research and look at those adjuncts, that can help. I haven't had the most success teaching with adjuncts. I think I tend to work more with full-time tenure track faculty, but I definitely reach out to all the adjuncts. And I also will look at what classes they're teaching. So it's definitely a lot to keep up with, but I think doing that research kind of can help set you up for success. Oh, and somebody mentioned new faculty orientation. I think that's excellent. If your campus has one of those, that's something that I think our libraries wanted to be involved with and has had a little bit of trouble breaking into, but that's an excellent idea. Okay, and we have somebody else who tried the in-person thing and it didn't work as well for them. So I can totally understand that. I don't know that that's necessarily the most successful option. And then Jenny Lynn mentioned that word of mouth works. And yeah, that's not something I mentioned because it's kind of hard to cultivate, but I think that if you get buy-in from people really early on, especially, you can kind of ask them, especially if they seem like they might be amenable to it, to say like, would you mind mentioning this at your department meeting? Or would you mind, telling some of your colleagues about it? And I got some instruction sessions that way. I taught a marketing session kind of for a lower level class for a really friendly, amazing professor. And she kind of talked to somebody who teaches kind of more senior level classes. And after I taught one for her the next semester, he was like, okay, I will work with you now. And so that was helpful. Yes, and then Teddy mentioned that too. It's a great point. And then Heather is kind of talking about how she focuses her emails, so picking like 2 or 3 things to highlight. And I think that's kind of a great idea. Yeah, is narrowing down that focus. And some other people are kind of mentioning LibGuides or online tutorials and kind of instructional design, which I think can also be another kind of way to, so you don't necessarily have to have an MBA, but I think another way of proving your credentials is to kind of, show that you have this expertise in instruction and information literacy. So I think that those are kind of another route to doing that. Oh, and then someone's also talking about digital signage. That is a better idea than flyers, because then they're more likely to stay up longer. So I think, Heather, you mentioned in the chat that you kind of do some research on what faculty's research is. I'd love to hear more about that if you wouldn't mind sharing kind of like how that's gone.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm really lucky our scholarly communication unit, in order to set up the selected works for everyone in our scholar works, institutional repository, they always get a list of all incoming faculty, and then they pass that on to the liaisons before the new faculty orientation. And then at new faculty orientation, they have a library segment where they like walk all the new faculty over to the library and they get to meet with their liaisons for a little minute. So I always try to make a point of looking up all my new people and see, oh, are they a new grad? Are they transferring from someplace that almost inevitably always has way more databases than we do? And I want to warn them that that's happening. But I've always had such a great response when I'm like, oh yeah, you're coming from Kentucky, right? And they're like, oh yeah, like checked me out. That's kind of cool. I appreciate that. So it's just been a good way. Like someone else said in the chat, you almost want to always catch the new faculty because they're usually like more open to working with you than the people who've been there a long time, set in their ways.
Thank you. That's incredibly helpful. And that sounds like a great way to kind of impress people with your knowledge of them. So yeah, I wish I had, like I said, I wish I had the opportunity to go to new faculty orientation. I'm going to keep trying on that myself. Oh, and then Jennifer in the chat mentioned submitting an item to the undergraduate newsletter for the business school, which is a really creative idea. Yeah, that's a great idea as well. I haven't thought of that, but.
There was also a question, how do you tap instructional designers?
Sure, I wasn't sure if that was a question for me or for the person who mentioned instructional designers. Marie, I'm not sure. Were you asking Diane about that? Okay, she says either one. I mean, I can answer. I think that figuring out if your school has kind of people with that specialty. At our school, it's kind of that same group that does faculty development, the Center for Teaching and Learning, which I think is really common on a lot of campuses. I think that they also really like to collaborate with librarians, at least on my campus. So reaching out to them when you can be really helpful. I had a ton of experience working with them. So the person who talked about it earlier, Diane, may want to weigh in as well. And Emily just asked a really great question, what people think of newsletters for faculty. So I know that's a really common thing in research I've seen about outreach. So if anybody has any feedback on how that's gone for them. Okay, and then Marie kind of followed up with another question. So thank you for that. A good strategy to tap into them. I think they can be really helpful when creating kind of online tutorials or modules, as well as like designing instruction, especially if you're going to be teaching a longer class. And I think that they're kind of meant to work with faculty, and often librarians are faculty as well. So I think I've had success just making appointments and meeting with them like a faculty member on campus would, and kind of coming to them with kind of a starting point or some specific questions. And I found them to be really, really amenable to that. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, I'm seeing that the few people have responded about the newsletters haven't really seen much return on that investment. So that's interesting. Yeah. I think in my experience, I've just found the shorter the better always.
Catherine, I was curious about the ebook notifications. Why did you choose ebooks instead of, is it because it takes longer to process print materials, or has your library changed to mostly ebooks, or could you explain that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of that reason is I think we do 80 to 85% of all of our collecting online, because we have a a pretty good number of distance students. So we've kind of shifted that focus. So that is where most of our collection development happens anyways. And that you're right, that's another reason the processing can be kind of slower. So it's easier to highlight those more quickly, because if I had just purchased them, they're really quick to get uploaded. And also because they could read them from those links. But I definitely think that it could work just as well to not specify that they're ebooks and also include actual physical titles as well. I would see no problem with that. Or you could even do one for each, but I think it would be fine to just kind of include it all in the graphic. And then we also just got a question in the chat about trying podcasting, which is not something that I have expertise in. Jennifer, that's a great point. Popular collections, I think there's so many kind of popular business books. So I think that's a great idea, especially bringing them to the business school. That's a really great idea for kind of a display. And I think students would appreciate that. So that's a great point, especially if people are already doing that. I know I do spend a good portion of that to purchase kind of physical books, especially when they're popular. So if others are already doing that, that's a great idea to showcase that. So I think we have just a few more minutes left. I think we have kind of a 45-minute block for the session. So if anybody else has any final questions or final points to share. And I think we have a question in the chat about podcasting. So if anybody else here has expertise about that, please feel free to chime in, because that's not something I've necessarily done before.
I'll just chime in about podcasting. I don't have direct experience with it, but our library communications team hosts a podcast called Librarians Out Loud, and they've had several liaisons on. So my engineering librarian and I joined to talk about supporting student entrepreneurship. And it was fun. Like, we also got to send it out to several different departments or folks that we knew. I'm not sure how much traction it really gets though. And it's been hard. We have some stats on it, but I don't think that a library podcast gets listened to as much as we'd like to hope. But we are.
That sounds really
trying.
cool.
Yeah.
Do you all have space for recording in your library?
We do. We have some nice recording studios. And I know certain episodes, especially we have some really interesting episodes on our archives and special collections. So certain episodes get listened to more frequently than others too. So it depends on the topic.
Thank you. That's very helpful. All right, well, thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate your participation. That made this nice as a presenter to have people interacting and sharing their ideas. So thank you all very much, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Catherine. It's been a wonderful presentation. Thanks for all the great questions, everybody, feedback and participation. Angel, do you have a few things to say about the next session?